Today we're making CHANNA masala. There are many ways to peel and chop an onion. I like to cut the ends off first, and then cut it in two, and then from there I sometimes take that whole top layer. Then can be easier. Maybe a little bit wasteful, but often we find that's a little dried up and wrinkled on the inside of that anyway, and we can discard that, and the same on the other one. And for this recipe we don't need to cut the onion particularly finely. We can just cut it into relatively chunky slices there. Maybe cut them in half or so, something about that size, so quite roughly. Likewise, our ginger, different ways of preparing that. Some people like to peel ginger. I find that completely needless. The extra fibre is probably good for you anyway. One way of doing it is using the fine edge of a grater. And just really go with that. Sometimes you find it fluffing up in little bits of fibre. That's okay. Sometimes you want to cut them off, but they'll all melt and dissolve into it in the cooking eventually. Most of them anyway, unless you're using particularly old ginger. This one is nice, fresh young ginger, as you can see, nice and clean. For the sake of convenience today, I'm going to use the blender, and we can help the blender by chopping the ginger roughly into smaller pieces. That makes it a little easier for it to deal with, but otherwise we could put the whole thing in and just blend for a little longer. Similarly, our garlic, many ways to skin a cat, as they say, many ways to peel a garlic. We could take it clove by clove. One way is to just press down with the flat edge of a knife and crush the garlic, and it will find then relatively easy the skin all peels away there. A little bit stick on, and then we can cut off that little top bit where the root usually comes out, and that's good enough to use there. That's one way of using it. Another handy way is with a garlic press. There's a little garlic press I have. If we have a lot of garlic to do, it can get a little bit fiddly and messy. We don't necessarily have to peel the garlic when we put it in the garlic press. Just drop it in there and then make sure that it's pushing down on it. And it's a question of leverage. We push down onto it and it comes out the other side. Keep it low because it can squirt around the place there. But we can see that creates a very fine pulp there, and we can just cut that off with a knife if we like. It's going to be easier if we take the peel out every time we use a new one. And then once you have your garlic broken up like that, you can chop it up quite finely then. So again, be careful of the fingers, keeping the fingers back. So one thing is to kind of pinch the fingers together, and we're placing the blade there against the hand there, so that the fingers can never come anywhere near the blade, or vice versa. We don't want the blade coming near the fingers either. And we can cut that up. It doesn't need to be overly fine for this recipe. We can make some of it fine or some of it chunky as we like. Texture is an important part of our cooking as well. We don't necessarily want everything to be a pulp, but in this one that can be useful as well. Similarly with our chilies, then we can chop them with a knife, or we could blend them. We get all kinds of different interesting coloured chilies here in Langkawi and Malaysia in general. Don't use the the stem, obviously. Some people like to take the seeds out. The seeds can be quite potently spicy. But I like to leave the seeds in. Again, I'm going to use the blender today to cut these up. Now for today, for the sake of convenience, I'm going to use a blender to blend everything. So I have my ginger, I have my garlic, I have my little chili peppers. I will put the ginger in first, since that's the toughest one to break down. Some of the grated stuff I put in there is also in there. And there we go, we have a nice pulp there. So it started raining now, if you're wondering what that background noise is. We took a saucepan, heavy bottomed, a bit like myself really, and then we're going to add a little bit of vegetable oil, and then also a little bit of coconut oil. Now we could use different things. We could use ghee, we could use clarified butter or ghee. Would give quite a different flavour. Coconut oil obviously is going to be a different flavour too. And we let that oil heat up a little bit, and then we add in our mix of all the mustard seeds and the fenugreek and the cumin and the cloves and the cinnamon and the coriander, and we pop all that in there, and then we lightly fry that. So that starts to fizz and pop a little bit there, and we can really start to get all those different smells coming out. Now you see it's foaming there a little bit. That's quite normal with the coconut oil that it does this. If you're working with ghee or clarified butter, you won't get that effect. And when you start to hear the mustard seeds popping, then we can add the onions. But before we add the onions, you can hear it popping, I'm going to add a few curry leaves. These are fresh curry leaves. We're very lucky to be able to get them fresh locally there. And they give a wonderful flavour to it as well. You can see them frying up nicely. Oh wow, smell of that. And it really flavours the oil. So this idea of flavouring the oil is a very basic thing in Indian cookery, a lot of Asian cooking. So everything that you cook subsequently in that flavoured oil is going to take on the flavours there. So things are popping nicely. We're going to add in those chopped onions, the red onions, the yellow onions. You can use just yellow onions or just red onions, whatever you like. There's no particular need to use one or the other. It's slightly different flavours again, so there's no fixed or givens in cookery. Play around with it. So perhaps we can see that's all starting to soften up now. We're getting a little bit brown, but not quite yet. But at this stage I'm going to add in that paste that I made then. That's what it's looking like now. Remember, that was just the ginger and the garlic and the chili peppers, and that should have quite a kick. And even as we start to let that cook, we'll see sometimes it catches on the bottom of the pan, so we use the moisture coming from the onions to try and rub that off. Keep at that for a little while. So at this stage I'm going to add in two other ingredients. I'm going to add in a little bit of... So while we were away, charging the battery, I added in a little bit of besan, chickpea flour or gram flour, and I've mixed that into the mix as well. And then when that really started to stick to the bottom, then I added in a little bit of water. So that's been cooking away nicely there now for a few minutes. Next, what we're going to do is add in the tomatoes. And we'll stir that through, and that's essentially our mix now. At this stage we can start to think about adding some salt and maybe even a little bit of pepper, but I'm not going to bother with pepper until it's cooked a little more and I taste how it is for seasoning with all that chili and ginger. It should be quite spicy then. So it's going to be quite a big dish, so I'm going to put in quite a bit of salt there. If I put the salt in earlier while we were cooking the onions, then the the onions would have started to cook in their own juice rather than cooking in the oil, which is going to change the texture and the flavour very much. So if we put the salt in now, what the salt is going to help to do is take the juice out of the tomatoes, and then the whole lot will cook through there. So we'll leave that to sit for a little while and we'll come back to that. So meanwhile, this is bubbling away. I added in a little water to make that sort of a soupy consistency with the salt. And then at the end we'll add in a little bit of coconut milk. So now our sauce is more or less cooked. We can see the kind of consistency we have. That we've got to keep it stirring a little bit so things don't sink down too much to the bottom. And now all that remains to do is add our chickpeas. So we need to be a little bit careful when dealing with pressure cookers. Now I've taken off the steam cap, and it can still be quite hot inside. And let's see how these chickpeas are done. Hopefully they're okay. See, it's quite hot there. And as you can see now, they're nicely cooked. I'll just crush one there for the sake of it. See, that crushes quite nicely there. So they're cooked there. They're fine. So we'll strain them now. And there we go. So, as we said earlier, we did not put any salt or any seasoning whatsoever on these chickpeas. We put plenty inside the paste. It's quite spicy. I've tasted it. The salt is just nice. So if I leave that to sit in there over there, that will absorb the flavour. So now we've added our chickpeas into the sauce. Oh, we can see that looks lovely there. It's not necessarily a traditional Indian version of doing it, a traditional my way of doing it.